Hi, I'm Maura. And this past Christmas, my sister told me there wasn't a place at the table for me. Not because they ran out of chairs, not because I couldn't make it, but because, somewhere along the way, they decided I didn't belong. I watched my childhood seat go to the family dog. I served drinks while they toasted each other's success. I opened a gift bag with a sale tag still attached, lavender soap I'm allergic to. And then, I did something none of them saw coming. What happens when the people who raised you slowly erase you, without ever saying a word? Let me show you. It started with coffee and a lazy scroll. I was curled up on the sofa, blanket wrapped around my legs, the winter sun barely doing its job through the frosted windows of my apartment in Minneapolis. Mid-December had settled in with its usual chill, but I wasn't bothered. I had work deadlines, holiday cards to design for a few clients, and a new candle that made the place smell like pine needles and vanilla. It was supposed to be a quiet Sunday. I wasn't looking for trouble. That's what I told myself later. My thumb froze above my phone screen when I saw it. My cousin Brooke's Facebook post. A boomerang of clinking wine glasses and laughter over a table decked with red and gold runners. And the caption, "Can't wait for this year's Christmas dinner. So much love in one place." My stomach dropped. There had been no email, no group text, no call. I'd heard nothing. Frowning, I opened the family group chat. I hadn't checked it in weeks. Work had consumed me, and to be honest, the group had been quieter lately, or so I'd thought. Except now, the chat was gone. I scrolled faster, searched keywords. Nothing. I wasn't muted. I wasn't archived. I was gone. At first, I stared at the screen, blinking like the answer might appear if I looked long enough. Then came the flush of heat in my cheeks, followed by that hollow echo in my chest. Had I been removed? Accidentally? On purpose? The last message I remembered sending was after Thanksgiving. I'd asked if anyone had leftover pie, mostly as a joke. No one had responded. My mind raced through every possible scenario. Had I said something wrong? Forgotten a birthday? Maybe someone was upset about the Christmas card I didn't send last year. I hovered over my sister Jody's name, then backed out of the app entirely. No, not like this. It couldn't be what it looked like, but it was. Still, I needed confirmation, so I opened a new message window and typed, "Hey, just wondering, are we doing the Christmas dinner this year?" I stared at the blinking cursor for almost a full minute before pressing send. It didn't take long for Jody to reply. She was always quick on the phone, always managing family logistics like it was a full-time job. Her message came with a casualness that made my throat tighten. "Oh, yeah, I figured you'd be too busy with work or something." That was it. No follow-up, no apology, no offer to include me now that I'd noticed. It wasn't a mistake. It was intentional. I didn't write back. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I tried to focus on my client work, on scheduling social posts, and fixing alignment in brochure layouts, but my eyes kept drifting toward my phone. I told myself I shouldn't care this much, that it was just one dinner, that being left out didn't define my place in the family. But those words felt like pebbles thrown into a well. They made ripples, but they didn't fill the void. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling fan as it rotated slowly above me, the rhythm too quiet to distract and too steady to ignore. The more I tried to push the thought away, the clearer it became. This wasn't new. Last year, I had received the invite the night before the dinner. No one picked up when I called. By the time I showed up, dessert had been served, and I ended up helping clean up while everyone else sipped wine and talked about their vacations. The year before that, I'd been told to swing by if you're free, as if showing up was an optional performance for a crowd that wouldn't notice if I missed my cue. Each time, I had made excuses. They were busy, they forgot. It wasn't personal, but it was personal. This year, there was no excuse left to believe in. No plausible reason that could make the silence feel accidental. It wasn't about logistics. It was about erasure. I sat at my desk, opened a blank document on my laptop, and watched the cursor blink. I started to type a response to Jody, then deleted it, typed another, deleted again. The urge to scream into the void clawed at me, but what good would it do? They wouldn't hear it, and if they did, they'd label me the problem. The sensitive one, the dramatic sister who couldn't just let things go. So instead, I closed my laptop, set my phone face down on the desk, and poured myself a glass of water. It wasn't just about Christmas. It was about every birthday, every family photo where I was placed on the end, easy to crop out. It was about every moment I showed up anyway, pretending it didn't hurt, hoping maybe this time would be different. It never was. As I stood in the kitchen, the apartment quiet around me, I whispered to no one, "It's not just about a dinner. It's about the seat I never had." And this time, I didn't beg to be seen. I closed my phone without replying, and that silence felt louder than anything I could have said. I sat in my car for a solid minute before stepping out. The air was sharp, dry, the kind of cold that tightens your skin the second it hits. I stared at Jody's house, wreath on the door, little reindeer lights blinking along the porch railing, and tried to remember why I was even here. "Stop by if you want," she had texted. Not an invitation, more like a suggestion, or an afterthought. Still, I had made a pie. Pecan with maple glaze. The crust had taken hours, but I'd made it the old way, like Grandma used to. Cold butter, iced vodka, not a shortcut in sight. Holding the warm dish close to my chest, I walked up the steps, each one creaking under my boots. I told myself I was being paranoid. Maybe the group chat thing was a fluke. Maybe this brunch would clear the air. Inside, the house was alive with voices and the clatter of cutlery. Christmas music played low, something jazzy. The scent of cinnamon and roasted vegetables drifted through the open floor plan. People moved around the island in the kitchen, laughing, catching up. Coats were tossed over the back of a chair, and Jody, always the hostess, stood near the oven, holding a tray of mini quiches like she'd been born for this. When she saw me, her eyebrows lifted just enough to register surprise, followed by a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Oh, Maura, you made it," she said, as if I'd dropped in from a different zip code. I held up the pie. "Figured it might go nice with whatever's on the table." She nodded. "Of course. Just set it down in the kitchen. We're almost ready to eat." I maneuvered my way past the island and into the dining room. That's when I saw it. The table was long. Jody had extended it with one of those extra leaves she kept in the garage. Every place was set with holiday china and folded napkins, each with a little gold place card in cursive. A branch of holly tucked into each one, a Pinterest-worthy detail. I walked the length of the table. Every card bore a name. Brian, Amanda, Aunt Liza. Even Travis was there, seated near the fireplace. And right there, at the head of the table, was a velvet cushion on one of the chairs. Coco, the family dog. Wearing a sequined red sweater, she sat proudly on the cushion, blinking up at me with her clouded senior dog eyes. Her name was written in gold Sharpie on a card placed delicately at her spot. I looked back at Jody. She offered a too bright laugh. "Oh, we didn't know you'd actually come. Coco gets anxious if she's not at the table. You understand." I opened my mouth, closed it, said nothing. I stood there, holding a pie, while a 12-pound poodle sat in what might have been my seat. Eventually, I found a spot near the kitchen counter and leaned there, unnoticed, while everyone settled in. Conversation buzzed. Vacation plans, new jobs, how Amanda's twins were doing in school. I smiled when appropriate, nodded when someone looked my way. But mostly, I was invisible. Midway through the meal, someone brought up career changes, and just like that, I became a topic. Jody sipped her mimosa and said, "Some of us chose stable paths. Some of us chose freelance vibes," with a wink and a light laugh, like she was letting the air out of a balloon gently. They laughed. Not maliciously, not loudly, but enough to sting. I stayed quiet. I wanted to tell them that I'd just signed 2 new contracts, that one of my logos was now printed on the side of a luxury boutique in Portland, that my work mattered, that I wasn't floating through life on Etsy and good intentions. But I didn't say anything, because in that moment, I knew I wouldn't be heard. The table had a center, and I wasn't part of it. Jody stood to pour more drinks, brushing past me without eye contact. No one noticed I hadn't eaten. The pie was still untouched, off to the side by the mixer. The one I'd spent hours on. The one that now sat like a forgotten guest. I excused myself quietly, slipped my coat from the pile, and grabbed my keys. No one looked up. I left the pie where it was. As I stepped outside, the wind had picked up. It whistled past the porch as I made my way down the stairs. I reached the car, slid into the seat, and shut the door. My hands were shaking. I looked back, through the frosted windshield, and saw Jody laughing at the head of the table, Coco's head nestled beside her plate. I started the car, but I couldn't drive. My hands trembled too much to turn the key. The hum of the fridge filled the silence in my apartment. I hadn't changed out of the sweater I'd worn to brunch earlier, and the smell of cinnamon from someone else's baked apples still clung to it. I'd left Jody's house hours ago, but the weight of that room, that table, still sat heavy on my chest. I hadn't eaten anything. The pie I made remained untouched. It was still in their kitchen, probably shoved behind store-bought cheesecakes or covered in plastic wrap like an afterthought. I lay in bed, covers up to my chin, eyes wide open. Sleep wasn't even a possibility. My brain kept looping, Jody's voice, the glint of the place cards, the way Coco's tail wagged as Jody scratched behind her ears. The laugh that followed her freelance vibes jab. I should have said something. Should have taken the damn pie and walked out when I saw the dog had a seat, and I didn't. But I didn't. Because I knew, deep down, I had no place at that table, and hadn't for a while. I sat up and pulled my laptop onto my legs. The light from the screen made me blink. I clicked through folders, design files, client drafts, old holiday menus. Then I saw it. Xmas 2019 menu, final.docs. I opened it. The formatting was familiar, because I had built it. Bold titles, cursive dish names, decorative snowflake borders. I remembered printing it at Kinko's the night before Christmas Eve, slicing each page neatly with my paper trimmer, feeling proud. That was the year they said they wanted to keep it small. The year Jody offered to take a break from me hosting so I could rest. But from the looks of it, she didn't just take over. She took everything. No one ever told me it was a handoff. There was no conversation. No, we think it's time for a change. Just silence. Then Jody's name on the invites, her initials on the new family calendar, her handwriting on the RSVP cards. And I let it happen. I assumed the best. That's what made it worse. The longer I stared at the document, the more nauseous I felt. I clicked open Facebook, searched for last year's Christmas photos. There they were, lined up like a Hallmark ad. Everyone in coordinated sweaters, wine glasses raised, candles flickering in the background. Zooming in, I recognized something on the table. The menu card. My menu card. Exactly mine. Same font, same title. Colin's Christmas Eve dinner. Same recipe list. Even the cocktail I'd invented. Pine and Pearl Sparkler. I remembered that name so clearly. I'd made a batch 3 years ago. Sparkling pear juice, rosemary simple syrup, and a splash of Prosecco. The card next to the drinks table had a drawing of a pine branch I'd sketched by hand. In the photo, the same drawing sat behind the punch bowl. No credit, no nod. Just Jody, smiling in the caption, writing, "Whipped this up from something I saw on Pinterest." I closed the browser, my hands trembling. It wasn't just the seat at the table. It was the ideas, the effort, the creativity. All of it lifted like it had never come from me, like I'd never been part of it, like I had simply stopped mattering. I stood and crossed the room to my studio corner. It wasn't big, just a section by the window with my desk, some corkboards, and a few framed certificates. Design awards, letters from clients, testimonials from people who had built brands with my work. I stared at them for a long while, There, in that corner, my name meant something. My ideas mattered. No one erased me there. My throat tightened, not from sadness, but from the clarity of it all. It wasn't an accident, not a one-time oversight. It was a decision, a shift in the family current that had been happening slowly, quietly, until I realized I was no longer drifting with them. I'd been left behind completely. They didn't forget me. They replaced me, and Jody. She didn't just take the seat, she took the menu. I whispered to the room, "It's not that they forgot. It's that they chose to forget me." It had never really been about Christmas. It was about presence, about value, about being seen as someone who belonged. And somewhere along the line, that was stripped away. Not with malice, but with the kind of indifference that stings more than cruelty. I stared at the glowing skyline outside the window, Minneapolis glittering in the cold. I needed to say something, but not with words. Not anymore. Lois called that morning with her usual practiced cheerfulness. "If you're around today, I saved a slice of pecan pie for you. Thought you might want to stop by." It wasn't really a request. Lois didn't do requests. It was more of a gentle summons, framed as an act of kindness, cloaked in sugar. After the brunch disaster and the creeping clarity I'd been trying to unsee for years, my instinct was to say no. But something in me, maybe habit, maybe that annoying sliver of hope, said yes. I arrived a little after noon. The driveway was mostly clear except for Lois's car and Aunt Marlene's blue sedan. The porch still held the last remnants of Christmas, though the lights had gone dim and the reindeer inflatables lay deflated like forgotten promises. Lois opened the door with a faint smile. "You look tired," she said, stepping aside. I handed her a small jar of preserves I'd brought. A gesture, not a peace offering. "Long week?" We moved into the kitchen where the pie sat alone under plastic wrap. No coffee brewing, no extra place set at the table. Just me, her, and Marlene sitting at the counter sipping tea with the bored grace of someone who never had to fight for attention. Lois offered me a plate and fork without asking if I was hungry. I declined. Instead, I helped clear a tray from the living room. Assorted mugs, napkins, a half-finished puzzle no one seemed eager to complete. When I returned to the kitchen, Lois reached into a drawer and slid something across the counter. It was a Christmas card, cheap stock, gold trim, no envelope. I opened it. Inside was a crisp $100 bill and a note in her looping script. "Hope this helps with your little projects." I stared at the bill, then at her. She didn't look up. Her hands were already busy rinsing out mugs in the sink, her back turned like this exchange didn't require acknowledgement. No mention of the dinner. No questions about how I was doing. No apology. Just the cash. As if what I needed was not presence, but a token of vague support. Something to tide me over until I learned to behave better. Marlene broke the silence, stirring her tea without looking up. "So," she said, "you're still doing that online art thing, huh?" I nodded. "Still running my studio." "Must be nice," she continued, her tone light but lined with something sharper. "Not needing a regular job, or a regular schedule. I suppose not having a husband or kids gives you that kind of freedom." She took a sip, then added, "But the holidays are about family, sweetie. At some point, you've got to think about what really matters." I smiled tightly. "I think about it all the time." Lois dried a mug and set it down with just a little more force than necessary. To them, I was a curiosity, a deviation. Not pitied, not hated. Just irrelevant. Floating outside the narrative they'd built for what adulthood was supposed to look like. They didn't say I wasn't part of the family. They didn't need to. They said it by giving the dog a chair, by assigning me errands, by sending a $100 bill instead of a conversation. We chatted a little longer, about weather, about Marlene's hip replacement, but I was already gone inside. When I stood to leave, Lois hugged me once, briefly, and turned away. She didn't walk me to the door, didn't ask when I might stop by again. I stepped outside, the cold biting deeper now. In the car, I stared at the card again. Not at the bill. At the handwriting. The curve of each letter so familiar it felt like muscle memory. Then I tore it cleanly down the middle. The money I kept. Not out of need. Out of principle. It was a refund. For years of giving more than I got. That night, I went home, opened my laptop, and deleted every shared folder with their names on it. Not out of spite, out of self-preservation. Jody's text came the night before. No punctuation, no warmth, just, "If you're around, we could use help setting up. Nothing fancy." It wasn't much, but I clung to it like driftwood. Maybe it was an opening. Maybe I'd misread everything. Maybe they had just been overwhelmed and I was overthinking. Again. So I showed up early, brought coffee, a bag of ice, and a bit of optimism I'd regret before noon. Lois answered the door in her usual pressed slacks and winter white cardigan. "You're here early?" she said flatly, like I'd breached protocol. "Figured I'd help," I replied, stepping inside. The house smelled like cloves and citrus. Holiday music hummed from a speaker in the living room. The kitchen was already in motion. Amanda was frosting cookies with surgical precision, and Blake was hunched over a tray of shrimp cocktail, arranging the tails in a perfect spiral. Jody emerged from the pantry with a clipboard. Of course she had a clipboard. "Great, you're here," she said, barely glancing up. "Can you run to Pick and Save? We're short on toilet paper and trash bags. Maybe grab 2 bags of ice just in case." She handed me a list, then turned her back to delegate something to Amanda. There was no greeting, no smile, no hint that this might be a moment to reconnect. Just a list. Just tasks. I took the keys, drove to the store, and wandered the aisles in a fog. By the time I returned, the house was fuller, louder, more jackets on hooks, more laughter bouncing off the walls. I hauled the supplies in and left the bags near the kitchen. No one noticed. On instinct, I drifted toward the dining room. The table had been set. It was beautiful, long and warm with linen napkins, hand-lettered name tags, flickering candles nestled between garlands of pine. Jody always did know how to stage a scene. I walked slowly, reading the names. Amanda, Heather, Blake, Cousin Drew. Even Travis, Jody's on-again, off-again disaster of a +1, had a seat. But my name wasn't there. I waited. Maybe they hadn't finished. Maybe my card was being redone. Then Jody passed behind me. "Oh," she said, "we weren't sure if you'd actually stay for dinner. You're always in and out." She said it with a lightness, like she was teasing, but it landed heavy. "I can still help," I offered, though I hated myself for it. She smiled. "Well, you could serve the punch. That's your old recipe, right?" I nodded, swallowing everything I didn't say. Later, Lois pulled me aside. "The cooler in the garage is leaking again. Can you take a look?" I said nothing. Just walked outside into the bitter cold, where the sun was already dropping behind gray rooftops. The garage was barely above freezing. My breath hung in the air as I knelt beside the old plastic cooler, fiddling with the drain. Water had soaked into a flattened cardboard box beneath it. My jeans were damp before I'd even found the leak. From the crack of the garage door, I could hear voices drifting out from the back patio. "She's not really the holiday type anymore," someone said. I recognized the voice. It was Danielle, a cousin I'd painted murals with when we were 12. Another replied, "Honestly, it's kinda refreshing this year. Everything's just more normal. Like, not so artsy and weird." They laughed. I stayed crouched by the cooler until the water stopped dripping. I stood slowly, brushed my palms against my thighs, and walked back into the house. No one asked if I'd fixed it. No one asked if I was staying. They didn't say I wasn't family. They just gave me tasks instead of a place. And when they thought I couldn't hear them, they were honest. I took a photo of the dining table on my way back through, then one of the garage. And before I walked out the front door, I stopped at the small buffet by the entryway. A linen napkin sat folded neatly in a basket, one I'd made years ago, with hand-stitched holly leaves. I picked it up, stepped outside, and dropped it right on the porch. I wasn't going to beg for a seat. I'd start building my own table. It was Christmas Eve, and I told myself I wasn't going for them. I was going for closure. One last try. One more evening of pretending I could belong, if only I walked in with low enough expectations. I dressed with care, even though I knew it wouldn't matter. A soft navy sweater, my mother's old earrings, the ones she used to wear when family still meant something. In my coat pocket, I carried a small box of handmade ornaments, one for each family member. Ceramic, delicate, personalized with initials pressed into the glaze. I had spent hours crafting them, letting my hands work through the ache in my chest. When I walked into the house, the air was thick with holiday spices and carefully curated warmth. Someone was laughing too loudly in the living room. Bing Crosby crooned from the Bluetooth speaker tucked behind the tree. Jody spotted me first. "Hey," she said, like it surprised her. I had the nerve to show up. "We're just finishing appetizers. Drinks are over there." I nodded, slid out of my coat, and tucked the ornament box into the hall closet. Just for now, I thought. The dining room buzzed with small talk and clinking glass. I lingered near the edge, hands wrapped around a cup of cider. My spot was never at the center of the room. It was always along the periphery, in the corners no one thought to fill. That's when I saw him. Travis, my ex. Sitting beside Jody, laughing at something she whispered in his ear. His hand rested casually on the back of her chair, a familiarity that made my stomach twist. She reached for his glass and took a sip without asking. Aunt Liza asked, loud enough for the whole room, "So how long have you two known each other?" Jody smiled, all teeth. "Oh, since before I really knew Maura." The room erupted in laughter. I didn't. I stood perfectly still, nails digging into my palm just enough to feel something sharp. I hadn't spoken to Travis in over a year. We hadn't ended dramatically, just the slow fade of two people growing in different directions. Or so I'd thought. But watching them now, it didn't feel accidental. It felt rehearsed. Dinner passed in a blur. I couldn't tell you what was served. I moved through the meal like a ghost, present but not accounted for. After dessert, the family migrated to the tree. Time for gifts. Everyone had something thoughtful. Amanda got a monogrammed apron. Blake unwrapped a framed print of his wedding photo, edited by someone who clearly knew what they were doing. Even cousin Rachel's boyfriend of 6 months got a curated gift bag. Then, Lois handed me a glossy red bag. The sale tag was still on the handle. No card. Inside was a bath set, lavender-scented. I was allergic to lavender, had been since childhood. Lois knew that. Everyone did. I looked around. No one was watching. The ornaments I brought, still in my coat pocket. No one asked if I had brought anything. No one noticed I hadn't opened a second package, because no one gave me one. I stood slowly, walked to the hallway, opened the closet, and pulled out the box. Back in the living room, I approached the tree. Jody was pouring more wine. Travis stood beside her, leaning in too close. I knelt at the tree, found a bare branch low and slightly off-center, and hung one ornament, just one. It had my own initials carved into it. I didn't make a speech. I didn't cry. I didn't slam the door or raise my voice. I stood, took one final look around the room full of people who had decided I was optional, and whispered to myself, "If no one makes space for you, you carve your initials into the frame." Then I walked toward the front door, retrieved my coat, and slipped out unnoticed. I left early, unnoticed, but not unchanged. The air in the dining room had thickened. Maybe it was the heat from the oven, or the scent of too many perfumes layered over pine-scented candles. Maybe it was just the tension clinging to my skin like smoke. We had finished the main course. Plates had been cleared, glasses refilled. The tree blinked quietly in the corner. Too perfect, too rehearsed. I sat at the far end of the table, again, not technically alone, just outside the circle where the real conversations happened. Jody stood up, fork in hand, her glass of Prosecco raised high. Before dessert, she began with the kind of tone that made you straighten in your seat. "I just want to say thank you to everyone here." She turned slightly, making eye contact one by one. "Amanda, for managing the gift exchange. Blake and Heather, for picking up Grandma's old roast recipe. Nailed it, by the way. Travis, for helping with setup. And of course, Lois, for opening her home and making sure everything looked perfect." Laughter, nods, glasses raised. I waited. Not for applause, just a name, just a gesture. It didn't come. I'd made the cranberry sauce, the gingerbread. I'd arranged the flowers in the hallway. And yet, as Jody continued to wax poetic about the beauty of tradition and family unity, my name was nowhere in the script. She didn't forget. She chose. I stared down at my plate, fingers tightening around the stem of my glass. I could feel Shanda shift slightly beside me. I had invited her at the last minute, unsure if I wanted to feel more like a guest or an intruder. I was grateful now that she'd come. Dessert was about to be served when she leaned forward. Not loud, not angry, just clear. "That's interesting," she said, tilting her head toward Jody, "because I'm pretty sure Maura brought the best parts of this meal." You could hear a pin drop. Amanda froze with the pie server in hand. Travis's jaw flexed slightly. Lois looked up from her coffee and gave a tight-lipped smile that never made it to her eyes. Jody blinked once, twice, then let out a brittle laugh. "Well, it's not about the food, is it? It's about the feeling," she said, brushing imaginary lint off her sleeve. Shanda didn't respond. She didn't need to. The silence in the room said enough. No one defended Jody. No one backed her. But no one corrected her either. They just shifted in their seats, awkwardly refolding napkins, adjusting silverware, sipping whatever was in their glass. I didn't say anything, didn't need to. Instead, I stood, slowly, carefully. I turned to Shanda. She looked at me and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Not pity, not permission, just solidarity. I walked to the tree in the corner, still hung with symmetrical garlands and glass baubles like a department store window. From my bag, I pulled one last ornament. Ceramic. Hand-painted. Simple. On its face, in small script, I had written, "Silence isn't peace." I found a branch halfway up the tree, just high enough to be seen, not high enough to stand out. I hung the ornament gently, let it sway, then stepped back. No speech, no goodbye. I picked up my coat from the hook by the door, slid my arms in slowly, aware of every eye on my back, but refusing to give them the satisfaction of a glance. Shanda stood with me. She didn't hesitate. She didn't ask if I was okay. We walked to the door. No one followed. As I pulled it open, the cold air rushed in, clean and honest. For the first time that night, I could breathe. I didn't need to raise my voice. They finally heard the silence. The house was still when I woke up. No messages, no calls, just quiet. That kind of deep, clean silence you only hear when you're completely alone on a holiday morning. I walked into the kitchen, still in sweatpants, barefoot, my hair tied in a knot that would never make it into any of Jody's family portraits. On the counter sat the box of ornaments I never gave out. I'd brought them to Lois's house, carried them into the party with some absurd hope I'd be remembered. I brought them back untouched. While making tea, I reached for one of my father's old poetry books stacked near the window. Something fell out. A folded note. Yellowed slightly at the edges, handwriting slanted and sharp. It read, "If they forget to make space for you, make your own room feel like home." He had written that the winter I almost dropped out of design school. I was 21, burnt out, convinced I didn't belong anywhere. I'd kept that letter tucked in pages I stopped reading, like a seed waiting for thaw. I didn't cry, not the way I had before. This time, the ache felt productive. I opened my laptop. I didn't even hesitate. I messaged Shanda first, then Matt from down the hall, then Mrs. Daly, the retired elementary school teacher who lived 2 floors below and always waved when I passed by her unit. "Hosting dinner tonight, 6 p.m. Come hungry." I pulled out my notebook and sketched a long rectangle, a table. I added names, no hierarchy, no center, just enough space for everyone. Then I called the loft manager at the art co-op I'd once shown work in. "Do you still rent out the event space for private gatherings?" I asked. By noon, I had a key. I cooked what I could. Roasted vegetables, a honey-glazed ham. Shanda brought cornbread. Someone else brought cranberry punch. People texted, asking if they could bring their friend, their cousin, their neighbor, who just moved and didn't know anyone. I said yes every time. By 5, the loft was glowing with string lights I kept from a wedding gig 2 summers ago. I used craft paper for table runners, scribbled names with silver markers, and placed them beside mismatched plates. There was no theme, just warmth. And by 6, people arrived. Some I knew, some I didn't. One man came with a crate of apples and baked pies in the loft's kitchenette. A woman recited a poem she wrote about losing her sister to dementia, and I watched Lois's critique fade from memory. A boy no older than 10 played Christmas songs on a small keyboard with chipped keys, his mother mouthing lyrics beside him like a prayer. Everyone had a chair. Everyone had a name tag. Everyone was seen. And I, Maura, the afterthought, sat at the head of the table. Not because I needed control, because I made the space. We clinked glasses. Someone raised a toast. Shanda winked at me when someone said, "This is the best food I've had all year." It wasn't about the food. It never had been. It was about being welcome, not just tolerated. After dinner, I cleared plates and stacked napkins, humming a song from childhood that I didn't realize I remembered. As I wiped down a tray, my phone buzzed on the countertop. A message from Jody. "Saw your post. What exactly is this dinner you're hosting?" I didn't respond. Not yet. Let them come see what a real table looks like. I hadn't planned on going back. But my grandmother's cookbook was still at Lois's, and I didn't want it left to chance. She kept it tucked behind the ceramic rooster on the kitchen windowsill, and despite everything, I couldn't stomach the idea of it being tossed or loaned out to someone who would never appreciate the grease-stained pages or penciled notes in the margins. So, 2 days after Christmas, I pulled on my coat, slipped out of my apartment, and drove the familiar route without turning on the radio. It was that strange in-between time, Christmas behind us, New Year's still holding its breath. A sort of limbo that made the silence on the drive feel heavier. The house looked the same. Same lights, still blinking, same wreath, same untouched pile of Amazon boxes on the porch. I rang the bell once and stepped inside without waiting. Lois never locked the door during the holidays. The smell hit me first, nutmeg and ham. Comforting and, somehow, deeply foreign. Jody was sitting cross-legged on the couch, with Lily curled next to her, coloring. A few others were scattered about, watching football or half-napping under throw blankets. It was the family's sacred leftovers day, that lazy lull where people grazed and gossiped in socks and sweatshirts. No one was surprised to see me, but no one really acknowledged it either. Jody gave a wave like I was a neighbor bringing back a casserole dish. I offered a polite smile, took a slow breath, and headed toward the kitchen. Then, from the couch, Lily's small voice broke through the murmur of the television. "Did you used to live here too?" The question hung in the air. Even the TV seemed to quiet. Jody gave a breathy chuckle, tucking Lily's hair behind her ear. "She's just curious," she said, looking everywhere but at me. I met Lily's eyes, soft and round, and entirely unaware of the impact of what she'd asked. "I did," I said gently, "long before you were born." I kept my voice light, but something cracked inside. Not loudly, not with drama, just a clean, sharp break I didn't try to patch over. In the kitchen, I found the cookbook exactly where it should be. I placed it in my bag, zipped it up, and turned to leave, then paused. On the entryway wall, hung in a new frame, was the photo from last year's Christmas Eve. I remembered the moment it was taken. I had been there, at the very edge, standing just behind the plant in the corner, holding a glass of cider and smiling like I believed it mattered. In this version of the photo, I was gone. Not blurred, not cropped awkwardly, just gone. It was a clean edit, seamless, a tighter shot, everyone positioned just right. Jody and Travis front and center, Lois looking pleased, as if someone had finally trimmed the fat from the image, as if I had never existed in that moment at all. I stared at the photo longer than I should have. No one noticed. No one cared. I walked back through the living room. No one looked up. I paused by the couch, touched Lily's shoulder softly. "Merry Christmas," I said. She smiled and waved, and that was enough. Outside, the wind had picked up, swirling bits of snow in little spirals across the sidewalk. I pulled my coat tighter and kept walking. Sometimes they don't throw you out. They just delete you line by line, until you don't even exist in their stories. But I do exist. I'm just not in their frame anymore. They can keep the frame. I'm building a gallery. The snow hadn't stopped falling since morning. Minneapolis had gone quiet, softened by the hush only a heavy storm can bring. Outside my window, the street lamps cast golden halos onto untouched sidewalks. Inside, the warmth of my apartment cocooned me from it all. I sat at my desk, nursing a mug of chamomile, clicking through photos from the dinner I'd hosted. Shanda had sent them that morning, and I hadn't found the time, or the heart, to really look until now. Faces lit by candlelight, laughing, eating, listening, no one looking over their shoulder, no one being judged. It was chaos and imperfection, and it was the most peace I'd felt in years. My inbox buzzed. Instagram tags, comments, messages from neighbors and friends of friends. Someone had written a blog post calling the event a reminder that holidays are for heart, not hierarchy. Another tagged it, the most human Christmas I've ever attended. I smiled. Not the polite kind, the kind that starts deep in your chest and softens everything on its way out. Then my phone lit up again. A text from Jody. I stared at it for a moment before opening. "I didn't realize you were planning something that elaborate. Everyone keeps asking about it. Next year, maybe coordinate with us so it doesn't clash." No hello, no congratulations, no acknowledgement of the silence she'd built around me or the damage it had done. Just the barest edge of jealousy, dressed up like logistics. I reread the message twice. I didn't respond. Instead, I reached for the old letter I'd pinned above my desk, the one from Dad. The paper was soft now, corners worn, the ink faded just slightly with time. "You don't need their seat, build your own floor." I hadn't understood what he meant at 21, but now, at 36, it was gospel. I placed the letter gently back in its spot, beneath the sign I'd lettered months ago without knowing how true it would become. "We make room for what matters." The phone buzzed again. I didn't check it. Later that day, a voicemail came from a local gallery. They wanted to feature the dinner photos in a January exhibit on modern community spaces. Then an email from a senior center in St. Paul asking if I'd consider hosting a spring version of the gathering for their residents. I said yes to both. Not because I needed to prove anything, because the doors that opened were never meant for Jody to walk through first. They were mine. I had built them, brick by stubborn brick. Around dinner time, I reheated a bowl of stew and sat by the window. The world outside was still blanketed in white, quiet as breath. Across the street, a woman helped her elderly neighbor shovel a walkway. Kids dragged sleds down the alley. A man walked alone with a grocery bag swinging from his wrist. This was the view from outside the frame. No one cropped me here. No one moved me to the margins. I wasn't edited out. I wasn't a note left unread or a text marked seen. I was here, living, making, inviting. I took one last sip of tea, walked back to my studio corner, and pinned my father's letter higher on the board, at eye level. I didn't post a story, didn't craft a caption. I didn't need to. And sometimes, what matters most is what you no longer need. January arrived with no fanfare. The lights came down. The trees went out to the curb. The city moved on. So did I. There were no follow-up text, no delayed apologies. Not from Jody, not from Lois. Not even a half-hearted, "Hope you had a good one" from Amanda. Just silence, dense and familiar. And for once it didn't rattle me. My apartment still held the scent of the pine centerpiece I'd brought home from the dinner. A few unopened cards sat on the console, and one of the leftover ornaments I'd made dangled from the coat hook beside the door. I hadn't taken it down. It felt like it belonged there. I didn't miss them. I missed the version of me that once believed they saw me. Shonda stopped by one afternoon, her cheeks pink from the wind. We drank tea on the couch as the kettle refilled the room with comfort. She handed me a small envelope. "From one of your guests," she said. "Found it tucked under a napkin." Inside was a folded note, written in clean, slightly shaky handwriting. "You reminded me what holidays should feel like. Thank you for not letting me be alone." I read it 3 times. That note did more for me than any apology ever could. We didn't talk much after that. Shanda and I just sat, 2 women on a couch, watching the frost gather at the edges of the window. No noise, no performance, just stillness. A few days later, an email came through from Lily's school. The subject line, "Thought you'd want to see this." No message body. Just a forwarded note from a 3rd-grade art teacher. Apparently, one of my ornament designs had made it into their winter craft project. Lily had brought hers in and explained, in front of the whole class, how her Aunt Maura made this by hand for the people who didn't have family at Christmas. It had turned into a lesson about making room, about kindness, about the ways we can make people feel seen. The email had been sent by Lois. No emojis, no "love, Mom," just that plain subject line. I sat with that for a while. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even a gesture I could fully decode. But it wasn't nothing. It wasn't cruelty. It wasn't silence. And that, strangely, made it feel more meaningful. I didn't reply. Instead, I picked up the notebook I'd neglected for weeks, tossed a scarf around my neck, and walked to the small park near the lake. The one I'd wandered through on Christmas Eve a year ago, wondering what I'd done to deserve being invisible. This time, I brought a thermos of chai and my sketch pad. I found a bench under a bare tree, opened my book, and began to draw. A table, long and open. Not a perfect table, one with scuffs and mismatched chairs. One with chipped plates and uneven candlelight. A place where noise was allowed, where questions were welcomed, where no one was trimmed from the frame for being inconvenient. And then I added the people. The man who brought apple pie to my dinner. The woman who read her poem. The child who played his cracked keyboard like it was Carnegie Hall. Shanda, of course. Lily and me. Sitting at the head. Not out of pride, but because I made sure there was room. I stopped waiting for the door to open. I built a home with no locks. March arrived slowly that year, like it had nothing to prove. The snow melted in small patches on the sidewalks, giving way to wet concrete and the scent of thawed earth. I watched the shift from my apartment window, tea in hand, the world outside no longer silent, just quieter. In the community center's sunlit event room, I stood near the windows, watching the light filter in across the hardwood floors. I'd arrived early, earlier than I needed to, but setting the table had become a ritual now, something sacred. Not just forks and plates and folded napkins, but intention, memory, welcome. Each place card was hand-lettered, like the ones I used to make for a family that rarely noticed. But these weren't names from bloodlines. They were stories, veterans, artists, immigrants, single moms, people who didn't get invitations to dinners like this. People like me. I laid down a fresh bunch of daffodils in a jar and stepped back to take in the space. No one had asked me to do this, and that, I realized, was the entire point. A woman named Ellen was the first to arrive. She was in her 70s, wore a navy trench coat, and walked with a cane that clicked gently against the floor. She smiled, wide and open, and reached for my hand. I haven't had anyone call me by name at a dinner table in 6 years, she said. I nodded, feeling that familiar knot in my chest, the one that used to hold grief but now simply held space. I thought back to Jody's brunch, to the place cards arranged like invitations into a hierarchy, the name tags I wasn't given, the chair that went to the dog. It didn't destroy me. It defined the line between who I was then and who I became after. The guests arrived slowly, filling the room with that rare kind of energy that doesn't clamor for attention. It simply holds you. There was a retired bus driver with a recipe for cornbread he wouldn't stop bragging about. A teenage girl with turquoise braids who wrote poetry on index cards and left them under people's plates. A mother and her toddler son who climbed into the lap of a woman he'd just met, like they'd known each other for years. We passed dishes and stories, and the occasional tear. There were no speeches, no cameras, just a quiet reverence for the fact that we were all there, together, seen. After the last dessert plate was cleared, after the laughter faded into soft conversations and chair legs scraped gently back, I lingered behind. I wiped down the tables, stacked the chairs, collected the crumpled napkins. Someone had drawn a heart on their place card. Someone else had left a thank you note in a teacup. By the time I returned home, dusk had given way to a soft blue evening. The city outside my windows looked more alive than it had in months. In my kitchen, I took down the taped-up version of my father's old letter. I'd read it so many times, the fold had started to tear. I found a small frame in my closet, cleaned the glass, and placed the note behind it. Then, I hung it above the table, where I ate my breakfast every morning. When they don't make room for you, build something worth inviting others into. It no longer felt like advice. It felt like prophecy fulfilled. I stepped back, letting the light catch the frame, the script, the memory. In the reflection on the glass, I didn't see the woman who used to wonder why she wasn't enough. I saw the one who made enough, for herself and for others. I wasn't erased. I was redirected. And in the space they left behind, I found more than a seat. I found my purpose. This was never about their table. It was always about mine. Sometimes, the family you're born into can't see the worth in you simply because you don't reflect back the life they expected. But that doesn't mean you're broken. It means your light shines in a different direction. If I've learned anything through this journey, it's that you don't need anyone's permission to matter. You don't have to keep knocking on a door that was never meant to open. You can build your own space, your own rhythm, your own table. To anyone watching this who's ever been the quiet one in the photo, the helper who never got thanked, the name that somehow never makes the list, let me say this: you are not invisible. You are not a placeholder. You are the author of your own belonging. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever felt pushed aside by the people who were supposed to protect your place? How did you reclaim your voice? Drop a 1 in the comments if this story resonated with you. Or tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing the hearts behind the screens. If you didn't connect with this story, that's okay too. Tell me why, and where you were when you watched it. I welcome your honesty. And if you'd like to follow more stories that reach into the messy human parts of life, the ones we're sometimes too afraid to tell, hit that subscribe button. Let's keep making space together.